What's going on, everyone? It's your boy Dungeon coming at you with another builder's guide for Dark Souls 2. And in the last one, we did kind of like an introductory, like what do you kind of want to do? Very surface level, very basic. What do you want to do when you're trying to make a build? What are some of the early things that you would want to do? What are some things you want to look for? And some general knowledge about making a build in Dark Souls 2. In this one, we're going to take it a little bit step further, because in order to properly make a build, you have to understand the game mechanics. In particular, this video, we're focusing in on the statistics, your ability scores, and most of your statistics, okay? So, couple things to mention. I will be trying to put up some tear sheets up on there that I'll probably derive from like Wikidot or something like that, so that you guys can actually have a visual onto what I'm talking about. And I'll also use this character as, you know, kind of like a base of reference. It's just a generic character. It's a kind of like a faith slash dark hexer slash, you know, magic user kind of build. It's a little bit of everything, kind of like a caster build though. Alright, but that's really not the important thing. The important thing that we're going to be looking at are the statistics, and whenever I feel like it could be helpful, I'll put these tear sheets up to kind of show you a visual of what I'm talking about. So, without further ado, we're going to go ahead and get into the first statistic, and that is Vigor. Up and you see on the screen, Vigor basically is the one that's going to, the attribute that's going to increase your hit point statistic, alright? And it has two soft caps. So what that means is that there's two different areas that you can invest into Vigor to where you'll get different, and rather, not only different, but also diminishing returns. So like early game, as soon as you feel like you can start to devote points into Vigor, like, you know, if you feel like, okay, I got this weapon and I can use it adequate enough, then you probably want to start putting points into Vigor. And that first soft cap is set at 20. So every single point you put into Vigor will give you 30 hit points, which is a considerable amount of hit points early game. Once you get to that point, once you get to 20, then you might want to hold back until mid to late game, because the second soft cap is at 50. So you'll be getting 20 points for every point that you put into Vigor, all the way up to 50. Past 50, I would probably say it's not really worth it, because after 50 you put a point into Vigor, you're only going to get 5 hit points. And do keep in mind that when you put points into almost every other attribute, you'll get like 1 or 2 points of hit points out of it. So Vigor's not exclusively the only statistic or the only attribute that can give you hit points, but it's definitely the main one. Alright, the other thing that Vigor is good for is increasing your petrified resistance. Alright, so the next one, Endurance. Endurance pretty well has one soft cap, and that is at 20. The funny thing about Endurance is that you'll start with like, I think it's like 90 or something like that, Endurance, and then, or Stamina rather, and then as you put each point into it, it'll go up by 2. So you already start out with some stamina, and then you put 2 more in, you'll put another point in it, and you get 2 more stamina out of it, out of every point of endurance you get. Once you pass 20, it's a 1 for 1. In PvE, it doesn't always seem to be worth it to raise endurance on its own. In PvE, it's pretty darn important, because if you run out of stamina and your opponent still has stamina, that could be it for you. It'd be all over potentially. Alright, so that is something very important to keep in mind. The other two things that I really need to mention with endurance is that your endurance will raise the amount of natural poise you have in tandem with your ADP. And basically what happens is it'll raise it based on whichever is lower. So like you can see in this character example, my endurance is 21 and my ADP, my adaptability, is 24, which means that I'll only be getting points up to the additional points of poise, which is like it's a fraction of a point. I see right at the bottom it says I have 6.3 of natural poise. Alright, that is calculated because I have 21, a minimum of 21 of endurance and adaptability. So it uses the lower of the two. Alright, and like I said, you get a fraction of a point each one. I'd have to calculate to see exactly how much it is. It's probably like 0.3 or something like that. So it's not much, but I mean, it's something, you know, it's a little bit of something extra, you know what I mean? The other thing that endurance does is it raises your physical defenses. I think there's only a handful of attributes that raise your physical defenses, and this is one of them, okay? The next stat we're going to move on to is vitality. Vitality basically is the statistic or the attribute that is used for calculating your equip load. That is how much weight you can carry before you become encumbered and slow. It can determine your ability to fast roll, medium roll, and like slow roll, which I think that might not be the technical term. It might just be like flopping around on the ground, because that's honestly is what it looks like happens when you're above 70% equip load. It looks like you're just flopping around on the ground, and it doesn't really look like a roll, kind of. Okay, so anyhow, the way this one works is this has actually a few different soft caps. All right, now with this one, the soft caps that we have are at there's actually 3. So you've got 29, 49, and 69. All right, so every point that you put into vitality up to 29, you'll get 1.5 points of vitality. For every point that you put after that all the way up to 49, you'll get 1 point of equip load. And for every point that you put after 69, or I'm sorry, after 49 up to 69, you'll get a half a point into equip load. This diminishes even worse after 69, because you'll only get a half of a point for every 2 points that you put into vitality, which is extremely bad. I would probably say for most of you, bringing your vitality up to around 20 or 29 or something like that could be extremely helpful. It may not be necessary though. Like, for instance, if you look at this character, I have my vitality up to 10. So what that means is I didn't feel like I really needed to, and if you take a look at my equip load with all the stuff that I have on, I still only have a 44% of equip load. Alright, so it's not really, and that you can see at the very bottom of the screen. I'm not sure if I can actually indicate that. Yeah, I can't really indicate that on this. So basically, oh, the other thing that this raises is physical defenses. Alright, and poison resistance. Okay, so this is one of the 4 that raises physical defenses, and this is one of the few that raises poison resistance. For places like Harvest Valley and Earthen Peak, might be something to consider raising before you actually even get to these areas, because they're very high with very, very commonly loaded with enemies that will deal poison and environmental factors like pots filled with poison crates that will induce poison conditions on you. So that's pretty much everything having to do with vitality. Attunement that is the next one. So for those of you who want to be spellcaster, this is going to be it almost doesn't matter what type of spellcasting you're doing. Even if you're running a melee build with dabbling into pyromancies or whatever, you're still going to have some attunement. And the way that attunement works in this game is that you have a number of slots. So for those of you who play Dungeons and Dragons or whatever, you kind of know what I'm talking about. There's only a certain number of spells you can memorize. In this game, there's only a certain number of spells you can attune. And basically, the number of spells that you can attune, it has several caps, and each cap increases in the attunement score needed to get to the next spell slot. So for instance, you get the first slot at 10, the second at 13, and another at 16, the fourth at 20, another at 25, the sixth at 30, the seventh at 40, the eighth at 50, ninth at 60, and the 10th you get at 75. So pretty much you get a first few really low attunement values. Like 16 you already have 3, but then in order to get another 3 you got to double that score because you got to have a 30, and then it goes up from there. The one thing that's interesting about attunement, because you're probably like, dang, that kind of sucks, like to have your attunement so high to have so many slots. The thing that does happen as you increase your attunement, though, is that you also get to increase the number of spells you can cast. So like if you're talking about Soul Arrow, typically at low attunement levels you can still only cast 30 of these spells. But once you start getting higher attunement, then you'll get 31 spells you can cast, 31 times you can cast that spell, 32, 33, and so on and so forth. So that's kind of good, and that the number actually increases. The number of times you can cast a spell increases more the higher that attunement is. So while like from 40 to 50 you're not really getting any more attunement slots, you are actually increasing the number of times you can cast the spells. So there's still reason to continue to raise your attunement, even though you might not be getting spell slots as frequently. A couple other things that's important to note about attunement is that it increases your casting speed. The higher attunement you have, the faster you'll be able to cast your spells, which is always important, because if you can't get that spell off in time, that could be the difference between you living and dying. Both PvE and PvP. In PvP, I'd say it's even more important, because enemy combatants in PvP sometimes can be extremely aggressive. So you need to have those spells cast, and you need them cast soon, quick, now. It also increases, attunement also increases curse resistance, and it'll increase, so here's curse resistance right here, and it'll also increase agility. Now I do want to talk about agility. I will say this, I'll circle back when we get to adaptability, but the one thing I will say is that there is a formula that's used that is actually known. Early on in the game, people didn't have any idea how to figure out what your agility is going to be, but you can actually use this calculation. It's convoluted. It shouldn't need to be as difficult to understand as it is, but there is, I assure you, a formula that you can use if you're halfway decent with mathematics and arithmetic. You can plug in your attunement in tandem with your adaptability, governed by your soul level, which is this number up here. Alright, and that'll give you an estimation for what your agility will be. You can also use a soul planner, and that'll do all the calculation on its own for you, okay? But if you do want to do the calculation, there is a formula, and I will say that the attunement, it really doesn't affect it a whole lot. It does affect it, But adaptability is really the ability, the attribute that will rapidly change your agility. And agility is linked to your invincibility frames when you roll. So that's pretty important when you're trying to dodge out of the way of attacks. Okay, so moving on from this one, we've got strength. All right, so if you're trying to do a strength build, this is super important for you to know that there are different numbers for when you actually start to get more bonuses for your attack damage with regard to your strength attribute. Basically, it's like a 1 to 2 ish ratio, all the way up to about 30. And once you get to 30 though, that's when it actually changes. From 30 to 40, you're gaining a lot more damage bonus. So early-ish mid-game might be a good idea to focus down on, if you're trying to do like a strength build. Once you have your vigor up to a decent number, like 20 or so, then it might be a good idea to just double down on your strength and get that to 40, because all the way up to 30, it's not really giving you a whole lot of extra bonus. But once you get from 30 to 40, the bonuses are real. Like you're doing, if you gain 3 or 4 levels and you would put them all into strength, between moving it from 30 to say 34, the amount of damage that you're going to do to the opponents is going to be noticeable. All right, so this is something to keep in mind, and the same is true with Dex. We'll talk about it in a moment. But other things that this statistic will raise is physical defense. This is the other one of 4 that raises physical defense. And the cool thing about strength is that if you're trying to use a strength weapon, you can two-hand it, and that will, for purposes of meeting the requirements to wield a weapon, you can actually double your effective strength by two-handing it. So say for instance, and I'll give you a real example here. So say for instance, you're trying to wield the partisan, which you need a 12 strength and a 20 dexterity. You would still need a 20 dexterity, but you can two-hand this weapon and wield it with a 6 strength, because it'll double your strength score for the purposes of finding out if you can meet the requirements to wield the weapon. All right. The other thing that is important is, even though it's not really listed on your weapon damage information, like over here on the right hand side of the screen, your damage will be affected when you two-hand a weapon, if it's like not imbued with anything. It does have an effect. It increases the damage by a slight amount, so this is something to note. Aside from that, that's pretty well that's mostly everything you need to know about strength. Alright, so I do want to talk about dexterity, and similar to what was happening with strength, it has a soft cap of about 40 and 30. Alright, so pretty much all the way up to 30, it's not really going to give you a whole lot of extra bonus damage to your attack bonus damage, but from 30 to 40, you'll probably see a good deal of increase. Do keep in mind that these increases are based on the scaling of the weapon. So if your weapon has better scaling, then you're really going to notice the difference. But if your weapon doesn't have very good scaling, it might be difficult to notice the difference in when you raise between 30 and 40. But though that's really that's where the magic's at. That's where you hit the most amount of gain with your weapon damage, is between 30 and 40 for dexterity. Basically past 40 all the way to 50, you'll start to see diminishing returns, and from 50 all the way to like 99 or above, whatever, you are really not going to be seeing a whole lot of extra damage. You might see one every point here or there, but again, it depends on the scaling of the weapon. But in general, it's probably advisable to keep it at around 40 to maybe 50, depending on the weapon and what it is required in order for you to wield it. The other thing to keep in mind is that some weapons you have, if you want to power stance them, that means if you want to hold two of the same or similar weapons in each hand, that you are going to have 1.5 times the strength and dexterity requirement. So in that case, you may need to have a higher than 40 dexterity or a higher than 40 strength. So we'll talk about that in the next episode, actually. The other thing that dexterity raises is your physical defense, as well as your poison and bleed attack damage bonus. Now, we already talked about how the endurance is affected, your poise is affected by endurance and adaptability. Well, similar to that, your poison and bleed attack damage bonus is affected by both dexterity and another statistic. So poison is affected by dexterity and adaptability, which, we're going to talk briefly here in a moment about that. But your bleed is actually affected by your dexterity and your faith, coincidentally. With both of these, dexterity will increase the attack damage bonus by 3 points for every point into dexterity. The poison and bleed attack damage bonus is increased by 1 point for the other two. So adaptability, it's like 1 point for an extra point of poison attack damage bonus, and for faith, it's 1 point for every additional point of bleed attack damage bonus. So basically, if you want to have a poison or a bleed, build, then dexterity is really the main thing that you want to raise, and those other two, they're not as important, and but they do help. So adaptability helps for poison, faith helps for bleed, but dexterity helps for both, and it helps considerably more, 3 times more to be specific. All right. And that's pretty much everything for dexterity. Okay, moving on from that, we got adaptability. Now, we were talking about agility a moment ago with regard to the attunement, and agility, I'm definitely going to be putting a tier sheet up on the screen here in a moment, if I haven't already. But agility is what is used to determine your iframes for when you roll and stuff like that. Adaptability and agility are they really work hand in hand in things like how fast does it take for you to drink an Estus flask, how long does it take for you to use an item. And early when this game first came out, people didn't realize this stuff, and they thought that they didn't understand the mechanic, and it made it seem like this game was out to get you or something, because you'd roll and it looked like you'd be able to dodge it, but then you still got nailed. And people really didn't raise adaptability, especially because there was a dump stat in Dark Souls, the original, I think it was like resistance or something like that, that no one really, did anything with. And in this game, I don't know if it had something to do with that last game that the developers let's put a stat in here and let's actually make it worth something. And I tell you what, adaptability is a very important stat, not only for agility and being able to use items quicker and stuff like that, but also because of the poise, the additional poise. We were talking about the poise for the endurance stat, and this also raises poise for your natural poise when you use weapons, albeit it is a smaller amount. But the lower of the two stats between adaptability and endurance is what's going to be used to calculate that natural poise, and it's extra and it can become very useful. The other things that it raises are your poison defense, bleed defenses, petrification, and curse defenses. And this is also used for determining your poison attack bonus along with your dexterity. So both of those work together in order to calculate your poison attack bonus. And there are some weapons that can actually increase your adaptability. Like, for instance, a lot of the peasant armors will increase adaptability. The hand ladle will increase it, and the Mad Warrior's mask. They'll all increase adaptability, so something to keep in mind. Alright, moving on from this, we have intelligence. So for those of you sorcerers out there, this is your go-to attribute, and you want to get this thing pretty high, pretty fast. This has a few caps, soft caps, so I'll go ahead and get to that right away. Early game, bringing your your intelligence up to 10 really isn't going to do you a whole lot of good. It's going to be in and around 50 or so. But once you go from 10 to 20, you start seeing massive gains in your magic attack bonus, and magic attack bonus is going to increase like sorcery damage and magical weapon damage. So any kind of weapon that does magic damage is going to kind of like increase based on the scaling for each of these two things. The scaling for your catalyst for your sorcery spells, and the scaling for your weapon magic damage. Alright, which if infused, most have a B scaling, but it really doesn't mean a whole lot. These letter scalings don't really mean a whole lot. It kind of depends on the weapon itself. So just something to keep in mind. But it'll go up considerably from 10 to 20. From 20 to 30, on the other hand, it barely goes up. It's like a 0.5-ish increase. And then from 30 to 40, you'll get about 3 points of magic attack bonus damage, all the way up to about 40. And then above 40, it's like 1 to 2-ish points of bonus damage for magic bonus damage. So it's not like tons. I would probably say the optimal number that you want to get your intelligence to early game would be 20. If you can get it to 20, you'll be sitting pretty for a little while. If you can get it to 40, that'll be very good early to mid game. Late game, you may want to have it increased based on what type of sorceries that you want to use, because some of the sorceries, late game sorceries, have a intelligence requirement of 50 or even above. So that's, kind of something to keep in mind. Other things that intelligence increase is fire attack bonus damage, dark attack bonus damage, and those are calculated differently, and we'll talk about those a little bit later. It'll also increase your defenses for fire, dark, and magic damage. This increases your casting speed, just like how Attunement increased casting speed, so similar to that. And there are some equipments that can actually increase your intelligence, like Hexer Hood and things like that. Okay, and that's pretty much everything for the intelligence attribute. So we'll move on to faith. So faith attribute, it has, again, similar number of soft caps for your lightning attack bonus damage and lightning defenses it provides. But for lightning attack bonus damage, the soft caps are basically from 0 to 10. You're barely getting any bonus. It's like a 0.5 bonus. It's like next to nothing. However, from 10 to 30, you'll gain about a 2 to 3 point bonus to your lightning attack damage bonus. And keep in mind with these damage bonuses, like whether they be this one here, like the physical attack damage bonus or magic attack or whatever, any of these attack bonuses, they're not like a 1-to-1 ratio. It's not going to necessarily give you exactly 1 more or 2 more or 3 more points to your overall damage output. It's going to give you a bonus that your scaling of your weapon or catalyst will use to factor in how much extra actual damage that you get to do. Okay, so the lightning attack damage bonus from 30 to 40 increases even more, because it goes from 2 to 3 all the way to 3 to 4 points of extra damage. So basically what I'm saying is, the faster you can get your faith to 40, the better off that you'll be with it being able to do more damage. All right. However, you'll get diminishing returns after 40. So pretty much any point that you put in after 40, you'll really only be getting about 1 or 2 more points of lightning attack damage bonus. So, you know, when you factor that into the scaling of your catalyst or your weapon, it might be doing 1 to 2, maybe even 0 points of damage when you start to raise it. You might have to raise it a few levels in order to see a 1 point gain. Maybe you only get a 1 point gain every level. So you kind of have to take a look at the weapon or catalyst as it gets raised past 40. The main reason why you'd want it to be raised past 40 is so that you can use better catalysts, like the Dragon Chime, I think it's called. That one is pretty good. Or, you know, maybe a certain weapon or something like that. Or a spell, actually. Maybe there might be a spell that you'd want to use that has a requirement above 40. But those are basically the reasons why you'd want it above 40. Otherwise, it might not be worth it to raise it above 40, okay? A PvP scene, maybe it is. If you just completely want to go glass cannon, maybe it is worth it to pump a lot of extra points into Faith. But I will say, with regard to the PvP scene, the lower level that you can be and still be effective, the better off you'll be, and we'll talk about that a little bit in a little bit, okay? Without the other things regarding Faith is that it also will increase your fire attack damage bonus, your dark attack damage bonus, your defenses of fire, dark, lightning, and I think petrify maybe, or poison. I think it's petrify. One of those two. Let's see, what does it say? It doesn't say, but I'm pretty sure it's either petrify or poison. And then it'll increase casting speed. And funny enough, your Faith, I don't understand why. I'm not sure what the developers were thinking with this, but Faith will increase your bleed damage, which does present some pretty interesting opportunities, because if you want to make a bleed build, you can be like a Dex/Faith character, and you can get some pretty interesting stuff going on. I think like it's for every 3 points of dexterity, your bleed damage will go up by, or for every 1 point of dexterity, your bleed damage will go up by 3, but for every point of Faith that you go up, your bleed damage will go up by 1. So, you know, dexterity is still the main one factoring your bleed damage, but Faith is factoring it too. So, something pretty interesting to note about Faith. It's not something that you would think that it would do, but in this game it does have an effect on bleed damage. Okay, so that's pretty much all the attributes that we're going to talk about. The next few things that we want to talk about aren't really attributes, but they are related to attributes. So I do want to talk about fire attack damage bonus, and that's calculated by the average of intelligence and Faith. So for instance, my character, my Faith is 40, or my intelligence is 40, my Faith is 42. So the average between that is 41, because 40 plus 42 is 82, and then you divide that by 2 since there's 2 statistics. So that equals 41. So my effective score to determine my fire attack damage bonus would be 41. And what that would do is, you know, you can take a look at this the tear sheet or whatever, but that'll calculate a certain attack damage bonus. And the way that this one is calculated for the different soft caps is basically up to 10. You're really only gaining about 2 points, which sounds good, but do keep in mind that that's like between 2 different attributes. So in order to bring that number up by 1, you have to raise both of these up by 1, or raise one of them up by 2 points. So it's not really good at all, honestly, to get any bonuses up to 10. However, from 10 to 20, your bonus is raised significantly. From 10 to 20, you're at about 4 or 5 point average gain to your fire attack damage bonus. So you raise up each of these by 1, and then you'll get a 4 or 5 point gain to your fire attack damage bonus. And that fire attack damage bonus is affecting the overall damage output based on the scaling of your pyromancy flame for your pyromancy spells and your fire weapons for fire scaling. Okay, going back to the soft caps, moving from 20 to 30 will give you about an average of 3 point gains, and after 30 you're getting like 1 or less than 1 of extra fire attack damage bonus. So I mean, if you can get an average of 30 on your between two of these stats, you'll be doing a pretty good amount of fire attack damage bonus for your fire weapons and your pyromancy spells with the pyromancy flame. Okay. As far as dark damage, this one is a little bit differently calculated than the fire. It's a lot harsher because you have to dedicate your character to dark damage. With the fire damage, you can just be like, hey, I want to be a sorcerer and be able to use pyromancies too, and that's all good, because it'll average the two out. So you can completely dump faith and level up your intelligence, and you still be good at casting fire spells. However, with hexes or dark damage, it takes the lowest of these two. So if you're a sorcerer and you dump faith and you don't raise faith at all, you will not be doing any good casting dark damage, because it'll use your lowest attribute between the two. So if your faith is 5 and your intelligence is 60, you're going to be using the calculation of a 5 for determining your dark damage bonus. All right, and I'll put that tear sheet up so you guys can see it, but in general, the soft caps are 10 and 30. So all the way up to 10, you're gaining about 2 or 3, which really isn't the greatest, because remember, you have to raise them both. You have to be dedicated to be able to use these hexes. So about 2 or 3 on average, which means you're gaining about 1 for 1, maybe a little bit more than 1 for 1 when you raise each of these, okay? But from 10 to 30, you're gaining a 4 to 5 point gain. So if you can get your intelligence and faith up to about 30, you'll be doing a good amount of extra dark damage. However, once you go past that, once you start bringing both of these two up to like say 40 or 50, you're really not gaining a whole lot of extra. Each point past 30, you're only gaining like 1 or less points. So the only reason why you'd raise these two is to, say for instance, be able to cast miracles and sorceries, or to be able to cast high level hexer spells. Other than that, I probably wouldn't do it, honestly. If you were just going to stick with some dark orb spells, just keep these two at 30, and I would just leave it. If you were going to cast like miracles, bring it up to 40. If you're going to cast, sorceries and miracles, bring them both up to 40, because that dark damage isn't going to be affected very much past both of these being at least 30. All right. And that's pretty much all for those statistics. The last thing or two that I want to talk about is that this is your soul level. It doesn't really affect a whole lot, besides like you kind of have an idea for how many points that you can distribute in your attributes. You will be distributing them as you gain your soul level. As your level increases, you'll gain 1 more attribute point, and you'll just put it into it and be done with it, and you probably won't think about it again. The other thing that's pretty important is your soul memory. This, if you're playing PvE, it doesn't really matter. It's not a big deal. But if you're playing PvE and you want someone to join in and help you, now it starts to matter a little bit, because the way that this game does the PvP and the cooperative play is it uses a soul memory. It doesn't like scale your character to the appropriate level of your friend or to your enemy. it says, okay, well, how powerful are you? How many souls have you gotten over the span of your Dark Soul career with this character? And then they say, well, let's compare it to other characters. So there are like criteria and barriers that have been created for this game so that you are not paired with someone who's too powerful or too weak. And that's not just with your invasions, but also with your cooperative play. So, I mean, there's entire lists put together that show the calculations and what different type of items that you can use to alter that. Like, for instance, the difference between like a small soapstone to a large soapstone to having different rings on and red, red soapstone signs and so on and so forth. But in general, you're going to have a similar soul memory to whoever is going to be joining your game, or to anyone who you're going to be joining a game with or invading into. So that's pretty much how that works. All right, and that's pretty well everything. I don't think there's really anything else that I really want to talk about with regard to these statistics. I pretty much went over all of them, and I'll try to put chapters in there so you can kind of like go straight to the different statistics that you want to learn about and stuff like that. So other than that, as always, thank you very much for watching the video. Let me know if you have any comments about any of these things, if I missed something or whatever. Let me know if there's anything in particular that you want to know about with regard to specific builds or ideas for builds or any of that kind of stuff. The next one I'll probably be touching on weapons and maybe a little bit on armor. Quite honestly, I'm not too... I kind of have a very libertarian view on what kind of armor you pick. And I imagine most people do too. Kind of more as a matter of like, what do you want to look like, more than what is it actually going to do for you. So, but we'll get there when we get there. Let me know what you guys think about these statistics. Let me know what you think about what you want to hear about in the future with regard to these the different builds and the builder's guide and stuff like that. So again, thank you, and hopefully you come back and check out another video. Otherwise, have a super good day, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye everyone.